My husband is infertile, but I am pregnant. My husband is infertile. We consulted many top doctors and spent over 100,000 yuan, but nothing worked. In desperation, we turned to a medical bank for artificial insemination and had a daughter. The child was born healthy, and we experienced the joy of parenthood, thinking life would continue peacefully. However, before our daughter was even a year old, I found out I was pregnant again. After several days of dizziness and nausea, I took time to go to the hospital for a checkup. When I received the test results, I nearly fainted on the spot. The report showed I was about 6 weeks pregnant. I sat there stunned for a long time, as if struck by lightning, unable to speak. The doctor even thought I was overly excited. My husband Ryan is infertile, I swear I haven't cheated, so where did this child come from? I kept pestering the doctor to double-check if they had mixed up someone else's test results. The doctor was at a loss with me, so he ordered another test. The result was the same. The doctor tried to comfort me, saying it's common to get pregnant again less than a year after giving birth, and as long as I take care of my body, there's no problem. I forced a smile without saying a word, my heart burning with unbearable pain. Has Ryan's infertility really been cured just like that? We had visited countless hospitals and tried so many remedies with no effect, and now after stopping medication for 2 years, he's suddenly healed? Could he believe in this medical miracle himself? I found it ridiculous, let alone Ryan. Could he believe in my innocence? My name is Hannah, and I'm 30 years old. Ryan and I have been married for 5 years, and aside from the issue of having children, we could be considered the perfect couple. Ryan came to this city from the countryside when he was 20, and we both started from scratch, supporting each other. Over 10 years, we built a company, bought a house, and a car. Even after discovering that Ryan is infertile, I never once thought about divorce. I know he must be suffering even more than I am. We originally planned to adopt a child, but the process is complicated, and I don't want our families to find out. In the end, following the doctor's advice, we chose to use the medical bank for artificial insemination. After all, it was still my own child. After carrying the pregnancy for 10 months, I successfully gave birth to our daughter, Yaya. The child was healthy and adorable, fulfilling the dream Ryan and I had of becoming parents. Our family was blissfully happy. Who would have thought that less than a year later, I actually became pregnant again? I can't even remember how I got home from the hospital, I was dazed, as if in a dream. I crumpled the test results into a ball and then smoothed them out again. Should I secretly terminate the pregnancy or tell my husband? After much contemplation and weighing my options, I decided to tell Ryan because I truly hadn't done anything to betray him. That night, after putting the child to sleep, I called Ryan into the study and prepared him mentally first. Honey, I have something to tell you. Prepare yourself mentally, don't get too upset later. Ryan affectionately patted my head. Go ahead. I carefully placed the test results in front of him. Honey, I'm pregnant. Really? He stared intently at the paper, his face gradually turning ashen, his breathing growing heavy. I had expected this, he couldn't accept it all at once. It's true. Didn't the doctor we saw before say there was a chance your condition could be cured? He leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, silent. Worried he might misunderstand, I hurried to explain, you have to believe in yourself, believe in me. I haven't done anything to hurt you. He sighed deeply and said softly, I know. Then he stood up and walked out of the room, slamming the door shut. His attitude clearly showed that he didn't believe me at all. I followed him out, grabbed his arm, and insisted on making things clear. Let's go to the hospital for a checkup, see if your condition has improved. Or, when the child is older, we can do a paternity test. You can give me attitude then, it won't be too late. Ryan forced an awkward smile and said, how could I ever doubt you? I just can't accept it right now. Though he spoke lightly, he spent the whole night tossing and turning. Our life returned to its usual loving calm, but I knew it was all just a facade. Ryan came home later and later each day, and when he did, he would collapse into bed immediately. He ignored me, and I ignored him, just thinking that once the baby in my belly was a bit older, I would get a paternity test done. Then I would slap him right in the face, and he'd regret it too late. What surprised me was that my mother-in-law actually came all the way from our hometown to help take care of the child. She was deeply biased towards having a son, and after my daughter was born, she only stayed for 3 months before finding an excuse to leave. I knew she despised me for not giving birth to a boy. At that time, she kept nagging in my ear every day about which family's second child was a son, and how successful their sons had grown up to be. I thought to myself, it's a good thing she doesn't know her own son is infertile, or she'd probably be furious to death. Being able to call my mother-in-law over to help meant at least Ryan's heart was gradually letting go. With someone lending a hand to care for my daughter, I could also take better care of my pregnancy. But after a few days, I realized that wasn't the case at all. Rather than coming to take care of our daughter, my mother-in-law seemed to be here to monitor me. Whenever I went out to buy groceries, she had to follow me, even if it was windy or raining outside. She would bring the child along and trail behind me. When I made a phone call, she would hang around, straining to listen, yet she never seemed to hear the baby crying loudly. I told Ryan about it, but he dismissed my concerns, saying, "She's just worried about the one in your belly. She cares about you." If I hadn't accidentally seen the chat history between them, I might have believed him. That day, I logged into a website that required a verification code, and Ryan casually tossed his phone to me. As soon as I opened it, a message popped up, "Has she found out?" It was from my mother-in-law. Who was she talking to? Found out what? Curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked open the conversation. It turns out that every day, my mother-in-law reports my schedule to Ryan, including when I leave, where I go, and even how many calls I answer. Isn't this just monitoring me? A surge of anger rushed to my forehead, unaware that Ryan was already standing behind me. He snatched the phone away. "What are you looking at?" I said angrily, "What am I looking at? I want to ask you, what do you two women mean by this?" "There's nothing to it, don't overthink it." Ryan defended, his face flushed. "My mom is just concerned about you." Concerned about me or spying on me? I'm just pregnant, not a criminal. I unintentionally raised my voice. Hearing the commotion, my mother-in-law peeked in. "Hannah, there's a baby in your belly, don't get upset." I called her in. "Mom, you came just in time. You said in your message you were afraid I'd find out. What are you afraid I'll find out?" My mother-in-law stammered, her eyes constantly darting toward her son. Experience had made me sharp. I quickly calmed down and thought through what to say. "Sigh, what's the big deal? I shouldn't have kept it from you in the first place, but don't get mad when I tell you." Ryan couldn't sit still, he blocked his mother from continuing. "Mom." But she ignored him and went on. "Ryan bought me a commercial insurance policy, spent quite a bit of money." I stared straight at Ryan. He visibly exhaled, the anxiety in his eyes fading away. Needless to say, the chat history on the phone must have been thoroughly deleted by now. Those two women were really good at working together. Ryan knew I was never one to fuss over money. He wouldn't have hidden a few thousand yuan's worth of insurance fees from me. But what was the truth? I felt like I had fallen into a trap woven by someone else. If you can't fight it, just avoid it. I packed my things, held the child, and went back to my parents' home. After returning, everything became peaceful. I knew clearly that the root of all these changes was the child in my belly. But the doctor said, for safety's sake, it was recommended to do a paternity test after 14 weeks. So, I just needed to patiently wait a few more days. Without my mother-in-law's watchful eyes, life was very comfortable in front of my own parents. Suddenly, I received a call from Ryan's cousin, Peter. He had been driving at Ryan's company before, and we had met a few times. He didn't say anything specific on the call, just briefly greeted me and hung up quickly. I thought he was acting as Ryan's messenger, trying to persuade me to go back home. Later, he sent me several messages in a row, mostly just well wishes to take care of myself. Although it felt a bit strange, I didn't pay much attention to it. A day later, Peter called again. Hannah, I'm near your parents' house. Why don't you come down for a bit? Since giving birth to my daughter, I rarely went to the office. Peter, whom I hadn't seen in a long time, was just as I remembered, honest and sincere. When he saw me, he nervously rubbed his hands together and smiled awkwardly, asking, "You've been doing well lately, right? Auntie told me you and Ryan had a fight." As he spoke, he sized me up from head to toe, his gaze making my scalp tingle. I smiled awkwardly and nodded, "Pretty good, nothing wrong, thanks for asking." I actually wanted to ask him what was going on with all the calls and messages, why he seemed hesitant, but before I could open my mouth, he suddenly shoved a big bag into my hand. "These are walnuts from the mountains, brought back from my hometown, good for the brain." After saying that, he turned and walked away. I didn't have much contact with Ryan's family back home, so this sudden warmth left me puzzled. As I was walking back, a voice suddenly called out behind me, "Hannah." It was Ryan coming to find me. "Where have you been? What's that in your hand?" After not seeing me for a few days, he launched straight into questions. I handed the big bag of walnuts to him and replied irritably, "Walnuts, your brother Peter just sent them over." "Wretched woman. Talking about going back to your parents' home, but it turns out you're out here stealing men." With that, she threw the bag of walnuts to the ground. The bag tore open, and the walnuts spilled and rolled everywhere. Immediately, a few neighbors gathered around to watch the commotion. I was instantly stunned. Ryan had never yelled at me before. To be precise, I had never seen him yell at anyone. Now, his eyes were red-rimmed, his fists clenched tightly, like an enraged beast. The street was no place for reason. Gritting my teeth, I lowered my voice and said to him, "What the hell is wrong with you? If you've got the guts, come home and say it to me." Ryan sneered coldly but didn't come home with me. He got into his car and drove off. Ever since I became pregnant with this child, everything around me started to feel strange and unfamiliar. The previously considerate Ryan has become suspicious and irritable, or maybe I never really understood him to begin with. Why did my cousin, who never used to get in touch, suddenly come to offer warmth? Why does Ryan fly into a rage whenever he hears Peter's name? There must be something fishy going on. Peter called me again, and this time I decided to take the initiative. "Peter, thanks for the walnuts. Let me treat you to a meal." Peter readily agreed. It was a private dining room in a fairly discreet restaurant. As soon as we sat down, I went straight to the point. "Peter, have you been having trouble with Ryan lately? Is something going on at the company?" Peter didn't expect me to ask right away and stammered in response, No, what's wrong with him? Has he been giving you a hard time?" "Strange, if you two are at odds, why ask if he's been making things difficult for me?" I followed his words and continued, "Yes, he's been acting like a madman lately, taking his anger out on me." Peter kept rubbing the back of his neck with one hand, while clenching his fist with the other, as if struggling internally. I pressed on, "Peter, is there something you want to tell me?" Peter hesitated, stammering, I'm sorry." I was stunned. He was sorry to me? Where was this coming from? Just as I was about to ask more, someone suddenly barged in. "Hannah, what are you doing?" It was my mother-in-law, spying on me all the way here. With an outsider present, I couldn't lose my temper outright. I quickly stood up to offer her a seat. "Mom, please sit." "What brings you here?" "What brings me here? If I didn't come, how would I find out about the mischief you're up to, sneaking off to your parents' house for secret meetings?" I was at a loss whether to laugh or cry. "Mom, look carefully, this is your nephew." It would have been fine if I hadn't said anything, but after I did, my mother-in-law turned her anger toward Peter. "Peter, you ungrateful scoundrel, eyeing your brother's wife. Tell me, have you two been sneaking around again?" I widened my eyes in disbelief, thinking I must have misheard. What did she mean by sneaking around again? I grabbed my mother-in-law and demanded she explain herself clearly. She seemed to realize she'd misspoken, rolled her eyes, snorted, and shut her mouth. A few minutes later, Ryan rushed over in a hurry. No doubt, my mother-in-law had called him to catch us in the act. As soon as he came in, he shot Peter an angry glare. Peter sighed softly and lowered his head. Seeing her son arrive, my mother-in-law immediately perked up. You say I'm spying on her, but how else would I know she's up to no good? I slammed my hand on the table and stood up. What have I done? You all need to tell me right now exactly what I've done. Ryan pressed down on my shoulder. Hannah, it's all a misunderstanding. Let's talk about it at home. I saw him give Peter a look, and Peter got up and left, with my mother-in-law following him out. I collapsed into the chair, tears welling up in my eyes. Ryan, be honest with me. Are you suspecting something between me and your brother? No, I'm not. But you absolutely can't see him anymore, I'm begging you. Why? No reason. I'm begging you, just don't ask. A jagged crack suddenly split through our marriage. I looked at the man before me, clutching his head, pulling at his hair in torment, so unfamiliar. 8 years of love, 5 years of marriage, all clouded by suspicion. So, does this marriage still have a reason to exist? It was the day for our daughter Yaya's vaccination, and I needed to go home to get her immunization record. Just as I was about to open the door, I heard a fierce argument inside. Ryan, my mother-in-law, and another man. The argument was getting fiercer and fiercer. I was about to go in and mediate when I heard them mention my name. We agreed it was just for seed borrowing, so why did you go to Hannah? You already took the money, didn't we agree you'd leave? Why are you back again? Auntie, I thought it over when I went back, this can't be done this way. This man was Ryan's cousin, Peter. If Hannah finds out, we're all finished. Ryan was shouting. Outside the door, I felt as if thunder had struck my head, my stomach churning violently. In the end, I didn't go in. I never wanted to set foot in that house again. After much thought, I resolutely decided to report it to the police. Soon, all 3 of them were summoned to the police station. At the same time, the police took me for a paternity test. The child was Peter's. Although I had prepared myself mentally, when I got the results, I still let out a shocked gasp. What a family I had stumbled into, one that utterly shattered all my beliefs. Peter adamantly insisted he was not a rapist and provided the police with bank transfer records, chat logs, and a signed agreement. The truth began to surface. When their daughter Yaya was just over 2 months old, the mother-in-law discovered the medical records. It was then that she learned the truth: her son Ryan was infertile. Unwilling to care for a granddaughter who was not biologically related to her, she simply left. After returning to her hometown, the more she thought about it, the more distressed she became. Seeing Ryan's business grow bigger and bigger, yet having no children of his own, she felt bitter. After all, the vast family fortune would eventually be inherited by outsiders. Obsessed with the idea, the mother-in-law came up with the plan to use a donor. Ryan was an only child, and the closest blood relative was his cousin Peter. Peter worked at Ryan's company and was still unmarried. Partly tempted by the mother-in-law's persuasion, and partly thinking he could leave an heir and eventually inherit Ryan's company, Peter surprisingly agreed. At first, Ryan refused, but he couldn't stand his mother's crying, tantrums, and threats, so he finally gave in. Ryan was responsible for slipping the drug into my soup, and after I fell asleep, he left the house and handed the keys to Peter. If Peter hadn't had a change of heart and come back to find me after returning to his hometown, and if the 3 of us hadn't gotten into a fight, I probably wouldn't have discovered it so soon. When the police told me the details of the case, my teeth clenched tightly. The husband I once took pride in turned out to be nothing but a beast worse than an animal. Just to have a so-called heir, he treated me with such cruelty. During that time, I kept accommodating him, taking care of his feelings, all the while thinking I could prove my innocence once I got the test report. Now, it all seems like a joke. At the police station, Ryan knelt before me, crying and apologizing. He said, "Since you can accept artificial insemination, why can't you have a child who shares my blood?" The police officer beside us shook his head helplessly. Even now, Ryan didn't think he was wrong. I mustered all my strength and slapped him hard, my palm tingling from the impact. "Ryan, I am your wife, not a baby-making machine." He clung to my leg, tears streaming down, begging for forgiveness, saying he was momentarily blinded by foolishness. Forgive? How could I forgive someone who sent his own wife to another man's bed? It was better to leave it to the law. I terminated the pregnancy, filed for divorce, and everything went smoothly. My daughter Yaya can already say mama. Looking into her bright, sparkling eyes, I vow to do everything in my power to protect her and help her grow up healthy and happy. I will show her through my actions that as women, we must be brave and move forward no matter what we face. Ugly things may always exist, but that doesn't stop us from living gently and resolutely in the present.